too long to say those words that will change their lives forever. They changed my mother's life and in turn gave me the chance to stand here today and vote for a pathway to citizenship that can change the lives of millions of others. So today is a victory not for me or the Gang of Eight.
The senator has consumed 8 minutes.
I ask for one additional minute.
Without objection.
It is not a victory for the Senate or for any one community. By passing comprehensive immigration reform, we will have taken the next historic step on America's long journey to exceptionalism. I'm proud to have been part of that journey. In 2007, when we failed in our last attempt at immigration reform, I quoted the last phrase of Emma Lazarus' poem emblazoned on the inner wall of the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, which says, "I lift my lamp beside the golden door." I said then, the lamp, since we failed, is somewhat dimmer, but it will shine again. That the course of history is unalterable, that human spirit cannot be shackled forever, that the drumbeat for security, economic vitality, and most importantly, justice will only go stronger until we pass this legislation. And my friends, today, when we pass this comprehensive immigration reform, the light will shine brighter and it will shine forever. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Iowa.
We have talked a lot about how the immigration bill would or would not prevent illegal immigration in the future. This is a huge concern because we don't want to be back here in 25 years proposing the same short-term solutions to the problems. I want to take a few minutes about the national security implications of the bill. There are valid concerns that the bill will put public safety and homeland at risk. I'll walk through some of the issues and point out how we tried in committee to change the bill in this effort, and of course we failed. First, the bill contains a dangerous national security loophole that would render the United States government unable to share information with foreign governments about immigrants who have had their status revoked. An amendment to preserve the ability of law enforcement to access critical national security and public safety information and at the same time authorize the Secretary of State to share limited information with the foreign government while protecting legitimate privacy interests. That amendment was rejected. Second, the bill provides the Secretary of State with authority to limit in-person interviews of visa applicants abroad, and the Secretary of Homeland Security is not required to interview anyone that applies for registered provisional immigrant status. We learned a valuable lesson after September the 11th, 2001, because the hijackers were not interviewed and applications were rubber-stamped. An amendment to require individuals who may be a threat to national security to submit to an in-person interview with consular officers when applying for visa was voted down. Third, there were gaping holes in the student visa process. Yet the committee rejected attempts to delay the expansion of student visa program until the tracking system in place was improved. Fourth, the amendment makes it almost impossible to revoke a person's visa when they're on U.S. soil. An amendment to clarify the authority of the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Secretary of State to refuse or revoke visas when in the national interest, as was the case with the Christmas tree bomber, that amendment was rejected. Fifth, the bill does not address the concerns brought to the surface by recent events like the Boston terrorist bombing. We are profoundly troubled with the lack of concern about lessons that can be learned from the failings of the immigration process, which may have contributed to recent events like the Boston terrorist bombing. We need to understand and we need to address these failures before proceeding with some of the provisions in this bill, especially the asylum and student visa expansion measures. Putting revised procedures in place before gaining understanding of what does not work in our current system is not good stewardship of the trust of the American people and the trust that those people have placed in us as their representatives in Congress. Our nation's security is at risk, and we cannot ignore it. We need to understand what is wrong with the system to prevent events like the Boston bombing from happening again. However, an amendment to delay an expansion of asylum and student visa programs until there has been a coordinated review detailing the intelligence and immigration failures of the Boston Marathon terrorist attack was also voted down in committee. Our national security must be a paramount concern with any immigration reform. Eliminating weaknesses in our system, including along the border and in the interior, would make our nation much safer. Regrettably, this bill falls far short of this goal. I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. President.
Senator from Florida.
My father had a rough childhood. His mother died when he was just, I'm sorry, are we in a quorum call? Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
My father had a rough childhood. His mother died just 4 days shy of his 9th birthday. The small catering company that his parents ran together had collapsed, and so as a young child, he was forced to leave school and go to work. He would work virtually every day for the rest of his life. My mother grew up just as hard. Her father was disabled by polio as a child, and he struggled to provide for his 7 daughters. My parents met at a small store where my mother was a cashier and my father was a security guard. He actually lived and slept in the storage room of that store. Now, like all young couples, they had dreams. My mother wanted to be an actress, and my father tried hard to get ahead. In fact, after work, he would take correspondence courses to become a TV and radio repairman, but it was hard because he barely knew how to read. They did everything they could to make a better life, but living in an increasingly unstable country with limited education and no connections, they just couldn't. So they saved as much as they could, and on May 27th of 1956, they boarded an airplane to Miami. They came to America in search of a better life. Now, like most recent arrivals, life in America wasn't easy either. My father had someone actually phonetically write on a little small piece of paper the words, "I am looking for work." He memorized those words. Those were literally the first words he learned to speak in English. He took day jobs wherever he could find them. They both went to work at a factory building aluminum chairs. My dad started working as a bar boy on Miami Beach, eventually becoming a bartender. He saved money and tried to open up some businesses, and when that didn't work, they tried Los Angeles, they tried Las Vegas, but that also didn't work, and so he found himself back on Miami Beach behind a bar. The truth is they were discouraged, and they were homesick for Cuba, too. In fact, in the early days of Castro's rule, before he came out as a Marxist, they even entertained going back permanently. But of course, communism took root in Havana, and that became impossible, too. Now, I'm sure that on their worst days, they wondered if it would ever get better. And then the miracle we know as America began to change their lives. By 1967, they had saved enough money to buy a house. It was within walking distance of the Orange Bowl, where on Sundays they used to make a little extra money by letting people park on their lawn. My older sister was in ballet. My brother became the star quarterback at Miami High. But it wasn't just their lives that changed. It was also their hearts. Now, they still spoke Spanish at home, and they kept all the customs that they brought with them from Cuba. But with each passing year, this country became their own. My mother recalls how on that terrible November day in 1963, she wept at the news that her president had been slain. And she remembers that magical night in 1969 when an American walked on the moon, and she realized that now nothing was impossible. Because you see, well before they ever became citizens, in their hearts, they had already become Americans. It reminds us sometimes that we focus so much on how immigrants could change America that we forget that America has always changed immigrants even more. This is not just my story. This is our story. It reminds us of the words etched on the marble above the rostrum of the Senate, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now, no one should dispute that, like every sovereign nation on this planet, we have a right to control who comes in. But unlike other countries, we are not afraid of people coming in here from other places. Instead, inspired by our Judeo-Christian principles, we Americans have seen the stranger and invited them in. And our nation has been blessed for it in ways that remind us of these ancient words. God divided the sea and led them through and made the water stand up like a wall. By day he led them with a cloud, by night with a light of fire. He split the rocks in the desert. He gave them plentiful to drink as from deep. He made streams flow out from the rock and made waters run down like rivers. And he commanded the clouds above and opened the gates of heaven. He rained down manna for their food and gave them bread from heaven. Our history is filled with dramatic evidence that God's hand is upon our land, and who among us would dispute that we, Americans, are a blessed people? In the harbor of our most famous city, there's a statue of a woman holding a lamp. At the base of that statue, there's a poem, and it reads, "Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." For over 200 years now, they have come in search of liberty and freedom, for sure, but often just in search of a job to feed their kids and a chance at a better life. From Ireland and Poland, from Germany and France, from Mexico and Cuba, they have come. They have come because in the land of their birth, their dreams were bigger than their opportunities. Here they brought their language and their customs, their religions and their music, and somehow they've made them ours as well. From a collection of people from everywhere, we became one people, the most exceptional nation in all of human history. And even with all our challenges, we remain that shining city on a hill. We are still the hope of the world. Go to our factories and our fields. Go to the kitchens and construction sites. Go to the cafeterias in this very capital. And there you will find that the miracle of America is still alive. For here in America, those who once had no hope will give their kids the chance at a life they always wanted for themselves. Here in America, generations of unfulfilled dreams will finally come to pass. And that's why I support this reform. Not just because I believe in immigrants, but because I believe in America even more. I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
Senator from Alabama.
are we in quorum call?
We are.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I appreciate the excellent remarks from the heart of my good friend Marco Rubio. He is a great addition to the Senate. And I would say the heart of America is good. The heart of this country is good. For 30 years, they've been pleading with Congress to keep a generous immigration policy afoot in America, but at the same time, they've been pleading with us to end the illegality. And that has continued for years now. It just has. And the people have pleaded with us to do something about it. And year after year after year, Congress has refused. The President has refused. And that is why we now have 11 million people in the country illegally. And I think the heart of America is good, and they're willing to deal compassionately and not try to deport 11 million people. They want to do the right thing about this. But by a 4-to-1 margin, they have said they want to see this Congress do what members of Congress have repeatedly promised and never delivered on: create a lawful system, a system we can be proud of, a system that serves the national interest. So as I explained this morning, rather than working with law enforcement groups and prosecutors and considering the needs of everyday citizens, the sponsors of this bill have spent months in negotiation with special interests and lobbyists to produce a bill that will not work. That's the problem we have before us today. that will create even more lawlessness in the future. I want my colleagues to hear what our nation's immigration officers, men and women on the front lines, have to say about this legislation. Shouldn't we listen to them? They asked to be able to participate in these secret negotiations, and they were rebuffed. I asked that they be allowed to participate, and they were rebuffed. A bill that Senator Schumer, let's hear what they say about the bill. The bill that Senator Schumer said in committee was tough as nails. The TV ad that's been running says the toughest bill in history, maybe the history of the world. Well, is that correct? I have to ask. I think not. This was a joint statement issued today by the councils representing immigration and customs enforcement officers, the ICE officers, and the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service officers, a joint statement to association representing these thousands, tens of thousands of officers. They say this, quote, now shouldn't we listen to what they're saying? Please listen, colleagues. Quote, ICE officers and USCIS adjudication officers have pleaded with lawmakers not to adopt this bill. The Schumer-Rubio-Corker-Hoeven proposal will make Americans less safe, and it will ensure more illegal immigration, especially visa overstays, in the future. It provides legalization for thousands of dangerous criminals while making it more difficult for our officers to identify public safety and national security threats. The legislation was guided from the beginning by anti-enforcement special interest, and should it become law, will have the desired effect of these groups, blocking immigration enforcement. This is an anti-public safety bill and an anti-law enforcement bill. We urge all lawmakers to oppose the final cloture vote on Thursday and to oppose the bill, which we will be voting on soon. And they go, close quote. And then they say this, quote, and we call on all Americans to pick up the phone and call their members of Congress, close quote. So who do we trust on this question of whether or not we have a bill that will work? Our good political senators who work hard but haven't been out on the front lines doing the work, or to the people we pay who try to do the work every day, putting their lives at risk? And there's something else I'd like to talk about today, just touch on, and I think it's one of the least discussed parts of the conversation. We'll have others talk in more detail, I'm sure, about the enforcement failures of the legislation. But in many ways, this could be the most important. I know our friends in the media certainly hadn't given a lot of coverage to it, but I hope we will think about it more. And that's future flow of immigration for America, or the legal immigration part of the bill that controls the legal flow in the future. CBO tells us that our Congressional Budget Office tells us that the bill's large increase in mostly lower-skilled legal workers will push down wages and increase unemployment. Push down wages and increase unemployment. That needs to be talked about. It must be understood fully. Hundreds of people are hurting today. There was an article recently in the New York Times. I think 700 people camped out for 5 days to get a few jobs as elevator repairmen. They spent in the rain, they camped out, they waited in line hoping to get one of those jobs. There was an article involving Philadelphia where individuals who had had prior felony convictions, maybe not all felonies, who wanted work, and they set up an opportunity for them to apply to find a job. They expected 1,000, 2,000 showed up, and they interviewed a number of them, and the stories they gave were heartbreaking. Don't we need to consider the impact this policies could have on working Americans? It's a sensitive topic, but a crucial one. Here's what David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the UK, England, a British Prime Minister, said recently. Quote, There are those who say you cannot have a sensible debate because it's somehow wrong to express concerns about immigration. Now, I think this is nonsense. Yes, of course it needs to be approached in a sensitive and rational manner, but I've always understood the concerns, the genuine concerns of hardworking people, including many in our migrant communities who worry about uncontrolled immigration. They worry about the pressure it puts on public services, the rapid pace of change in some of our communities, and of course the concerns deeply felt that some people might be able to come and take advantage of our generosity without making a proper contribution to our country. Mr. Cameron goes on to say, it is our failure in the past to reform welfare and training that meant that we left too many of our young people in a system where they didn't have proper skills, they didn't have proper incentives to work, and instead we saw large numbers of people coming from overseas to fill vacancies in our economy. Put simply, our job is to educate and train our youth, not to rely on immigration to fill the skill gaps, close quote. Does that resonate with any of our people today? Have we thought through this as to how we should handle these matters? Let's look at our own situation right here in America. 21 million Americans are unable to find full-time work. 1 in 3 without a high school diploma are unemployed. 47 million Americans are on food stamps. Labor force participation is the lowest since the 1970s. The percentage of Americans actually working is lower and has been continually falling since the 1970s. Or not been falling since the 70s, but it goes back to that date when women were just beginning to enter the workforce. 1 in 3 youth in our nation's capital are living in poverty. It appears we are in an era of a new normal. Economists have been talking about this. A new normal where we see lower growth in developed economies than we normally would see. There's more robotics out there, and businesses are looking to contain the growth of employment, and low job creation has been the result. Our own Congressional Budget Office. Madam President, I would ask I be notified after 20 minutes.
The senator will be notified.
I thank the chair. Our own Congressional Budget Office has done a 10-year economic projection, as they do every year. They did this in January, unconnected to immigration. And they found in the second 5 years of our 10-year window, 2018 through 2023, we would only create, they said, 75,000 jobs. I know some will say, well, we're going to bring in workers and that's going to create jobs. But we'll talk about what economists really say about that. But what does this legislation do? I think this legislation has not given thought to the plight of these unemployed Americans. Colleagues, the legislation that's before us today adds 4 times more guest workers. These are people who come only to work, and not just seasonal workers. They come for years at a time with their families, but they come specifically to take a job. 4 times more than in the 2007 bill that failed, and many objected to on the grounds that it would hurt workers. It also triples the grants of permanent status awarded to legal immigrants over the next decade relative to current law. That's a result of the legalization process here. Experts who've looked at, and other factors, experts have come to the same conclusion. There would be at least 30 million people who would be given legal status over the next decade, whereas normally we would give 10 million people legal status. Yet to this day, the sponsors of the legislation have refused to tell us how many would come in to the country. What we do know is that the plan is not a merit-based plan, but mostly a lower skill, meaning it will hurt our poor and working-class citizens the most. We have data that shows that. This will be a hammer blow to poor and working-class Americans. As the Civil Rights Commission members, 2 of them wrote us. They had hearings on this. They said it's going to devastate poor workers. They say we don't have a shortage of lower-skilled workers. We have a glut of lower-skilled workers. That's a direct quote from their letter. So let's compare our current situation when the legislation was introduced in 2007. Today, 5 million more Americans are unemployed than in 2007. 20 million more Americans are on food stamps. And unemployment among teenagers is 54% higher than in 2007. Meanwhile, median household income, get this, median household income is 8.9% lower than in 1999. And that's huge. Professor Borjas at Harvard, himself an immigrant who studies immigration and economics, has said a large part of that decline is driven by the large immigration flow that comes into our country. This would increase it dramatically. We want to have immigration. We're not going to stop immigration. We're going to maintain a generous immigration flow, but the people need to know this bill increases it dramatically. And CBO did a report on the legislation. This is what they found unequivocally. The legal immigration surge in this bill will reduce average wages for a decade. Reduce average wages for a decade. Our own CBO said. It's a chart in their report. I had it on the floor earlier. And wages will remain lower for many years after that than if the bill had never passed. What about unemployment? The number of people out of work, it will increase, according to CBO. And per capita, GNP will be lower for the next quarter of a century. Yes, you're going to have an increase in GDP, and our colleagues are quick to say that because of a large new group of people, but that increase per person in America is not, doesn't occur. It reduces the per capita GNP. And these are extremely conservative estimates. Dr. Borjas, in his report, suggests the situation would be worse than this. Well, to whom do we owe our allegiance? To the groups that want more people in high-tech world or agriculture world or meatpacking world or other businesses? Or to the American citizens who work hard, pay their taxes, fight our wars, and obey our laws? Who is speaking up for their legitimate interest? So the time is long past, as Prime Minister Cameron has said, for a national discussion over legal immigration policies. We all believe in it. No one proposes ending immigration. It's a deep part of our tradition as a nation. But a nation not only has a right, but a duty to establish a responsible flow that promotes assimilation of those who come here, promotes self-sufficiency and rising wages, and helps identify people who can flourish. The last thing we want to do to invite people to come to America to work and find out there's no jobs for them here, or that they're putting Americans out of work in order to get a job, that doesn't make sense. We have not had the kind of discussion of this we need. But the data indicates, objectively speaking, that this will be a detriment to working Americans. A great nation needs a policy that promotes its legitimate national interest, that considers the tough time workers are having today as a result of high unemployment and falling wages. A policy that rejects ideas that will pull down even further the wages of hurting workers. Well, that could, as Senator Sanders has said, create a permanent underclass in America. It's a dangerous thing. We need to do it right. The legislation before us is a dramatic step. I urge my colleagues to reject the bill and to work on a positive reform plan that serves the national interest of all Americans, immigrant and native-born. Sadly, this legislation does advance the interest of those who wrote it, many of them with very special interest, but at the expense of the general public. Now, the vote we're about to have is for final passage. The promises of an open and fair process have been as hollow as the promises that this bill would be the toughest ever, and will end the lawlessness in the future forever. It just won't happen. Our law officers have told us this. This legislation is amnesty first. The illegality occurs first. It plainly lacks the kind of mechanisms that are necessary to create a law enforcement system that will work. There is a lack of commitment to that. You can see it throughout the bill. It's not written by people who are out there every day and who know the problems with enforcement. If it were, they would have fixed so many of these problems that are fully shown throughout the bill. Yes, more money has been promised with the recent amendment for the border, but that's in the distant future. But what about the rest of the bill? The E-Verify workplace enforcement system is terribly flawed. It's been delayed. It could be put to work right now. We don't need to wait 5 years as this bill does. It's in place. Why it would be delayed that long is beyond me. Unless you're not very intensely interested in getting started and making sure that after people are legalized, others can't come in and take the job who enter illegally. The entry-exit visa system in this bill, this S-744, 1,000-page bill, is much weaker than current law. Current law says you must have a biometric entry-exit system at sea, air, and land ports. This bill says you only have to have an electronic system at air and sea ports, making the system incomplete and unable to identify who stays and who is returned home on time. Interior enforcement is much weaker. Read the passionate letters from my law enforcement officers, as I've read this morning, pleading with us not to pass the bill because they say it will hurt enforcement and weaken national security. The method of processing those given legal status will not work. The Citizenship and Immigration Service, who manage this, is one of the big objectors to the bill. They say there's no way they can accomplish what will be asked of them if this bill were to pass. They say it would lead to lawlessness, and they'll be unable to identify dangerous people who should not be in the country. I thank the chair. I'll be wrapping up. Far from having fines pay for the cost of this amnesty, as the sponsors promised, is a huge budget buster. Huge budget buster now. The Obamacare provision that was supposed to ensure that persons who were given legal status didn't get subsidized health care now provides an incentive for businesses not to hire American workers because they'll have to pay the Obamacare premiums, but would hire foreign workers, the legalized illegal workers who are now given legal status. They would be having multi-thousand-dollar advantages in hiring them over American workers. So the legislation will not work. Let's continue to work through all these problems together. I do feel that our bill sponsors are clearly correct to say that we need to fix this broken system. A bill that will respond to the pleas of the American people for a lawful immigration system that serves our national interests and in which we can take pride is what I will support. How can we vote for a bill that our own Congressional Budget Office says will reduce average wages in America for 12 years? We've got in this group of American workers thousands, millions of immigrant workers, millions of minorities and African Americans and others at low wages. And this legislation, at a time they are hurting very, very badly now, will reduce average wages for 12 years, will increase unemployment, and will reduce per capita GDP for over 25 years. This is policy we've got to ask serious questions about. All this at a time of high unemployment, long-term falling wages, surging welfare, and disability and dependency. It's not a healthy trend in America. we've got to ask these questions. Our real focus, as Prime Minister Cameron has said, should be to work hard to train our people, our unemployed, our young people, for jobs that pay a decent wage, have a health care, and a retirement plan. This legislation will not end the lawlessness, as our professional officers have repeatedly told us. It will not do so. It will give legality, amnesty if you want to call it that, virtually immediately. And there's a promise of enforcement in the future, but our officers say it will not happen. It's not going to happen now. And I believe they're correct. I had the honor to be a federal prosecutor for quite a long time, and I know law officers, and I know their difficulties, and I totally agree with them. This was a letter that was written today from the ICE officer head, Mr. Chris Crane, a true patriot who's worked so hard to do this. He said, one of the problems with the bill is a failure to enforce the nation's immigration laws on the interior of the United States. It's not just a border issue. It cannot and will not end as a result of increased border security. It must be resolved through increased interior enforcement. 40% of all the illegal immigrants currently in America did not illegally cross the border, but entered instead legally with a visa and did not leave when that visa expired. 40,000 Border Patrol agents provided in your legislation will never come into contact with these people. You hear that, colleagues? These Border Patrol agents are not never coming in contact with the people who are in the interior who came on a visa and chose not to return. He goes on to say, systems like E-Verify and biometric entry-exit, still missing from the bill, may identify millions of illegal immigrants and status violators, but ICE officers will not exist to locate and apprehend them, rendering the system useless. The majority of foreign nationals identified by these systems will remain in the United States. 500,000 ICE fugitives are currently in the United States. 500,000. 2 million criminal aliens at large in the United States. 900,000 criminal aliens are arrested by local police each year. And they go on to note there are only 5,000 ICE officers in America. And this administration sues state and local governments who try to help the ICE officers get their job done. And then the joint statement today from the ICE and USCIS Officers Association say this, quote, ICE officers and USCIS adjudications officers have pleaded with Congress not to adopt this bill, but to work on real effective reforms for the American people. This bill, they say, is an, quote, anti-public safety bill and an anti-law enforcement bill. We urge all lawmakers to oppose the final cloture vote today and oppose the bill. Madam President, this legislation will not end the lawlessness. I wish it were different, but that's the facts. It does not create a merit-based future flow as has been promised, and it leaves us in a very difficult position. So I feel like that there's no choice for us today. So let's vote no on the legislation. It's not going to end the efforts. We're going to have to continue to wrestle with this. The good news is that the House, at least initially, what I've seen in their work, indicates that they're giving a far more prudent approach to it. The first bill that they produced, I tried to offer as an amendment but did not get brought up, really has an effective effort at improving interior law enforcement. That's the kind of thing we need to be doing. Then we can win the confidence of the American people, and we can move past this very difficult time in our history. I thank the chair and reserve the balance of the time on this side.
The senator from South Carolina.
Thank you. I may, well, thank you very much. To my good friend from Alabama, you've been consistent. You conducted yourself incredibly well. You're a man of passion, and I agree with David Cameron and Jeff Sessions. Let's have a debate about immigration. But I'm in the camp, let's stop talking about it and doing something. So this bill, in my view, is a giant step forward in many ways. Number one, for the Senate. We're at 10 or 12% in approval rating in Congress. My question is, who are the 10 or 12% and what the hell do they like? I'm in the body, and I don't disapprove of what we've been doing. But I see this as a significant step toward the United States Senate being able to work together in a bipartisan fashion to do something that matters. Is this bill perfect? Is it like, no. Is it like Senator Sessions described? No. It is a good solution to a hard problem that can always be made better. But to the American people, you've got to be frustrated by your Congress not being able to do the hard things, and sometimes even the simple things. This should give you a little bit of hope that for the first time since 2007, the United States Senate, in a bipartisan fashion, is about to pass legislation on an important topic that's emotionally tough but needs to be dealt with. To the critics, I appreciate the debate this time around. It's been so much better. But some of the criticism I'm going to address. Senator Rubio spoke in the most eloquent fashion about his family's history and about who we are as Americans. But everybody has a story. Marco's story is an exceptional story. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. Neither one of my parents graduated high school. My dad and mom ran a restaurant, a liquor store, and a pool room. And I learned everything I need to know about politics in the pool room. Great place to learn about people. But one of the critics of this bill, one of the organizations said that the average illegal immigrant has a 10th grade education. Well, all I can tell you is you got a United States senator who came from parents that didn't have a 10th grade education. To those who believe that how long you go to school determines your character, how much money is in the bank determines your worth, they really don't understand America. Only in America can you do what Senator Rubio's done, and my parents have long since passed. When I was 21, my mom died, 17 years younger than my dad. We thought he would go first, but life just is not so understandable and predictable. She went first, and 15 months later, he passes. My sister was 12. An aunt and uncle helped raise my sister. They never made over $30,000 in a life. They worked in the textile plants. And she has turned out great in spite of having an overbearing brother. But I'm in the United States Senate today. Why? Because I live in a country where anything is possible, and there are a lot of self-made people in America. I am not one of them. If it weren't for my family and my friends, I would not be here today. To those who say that among this illegal immigrant population, they're just not well educated, you have no idea how offensive that is to a guy like me. So you can take your criticism, and we'll just end it at that. 80 million baby boomers are going to retire in the next 40 years. To my good friend from Alabama, who feels like we have too much legal immigration. You know, I'm taking Strom Thurmond's place. He got married and started having kids when he was 67. Unless all of us start doing that, we've got a problem. Because in 1955, there were 16 workers for every Social Security retiree. Today, there's 3. In 20 years, there's going to be 2. Unless there is a baby boom that I don't see coming, and I'm part of the problem. I'm married. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. Unless there's a baby boom that I don't see, we better hope we can improve our legal immigration system. So to my good friend from Alabama, I couldn't disagree with you more. We're going to need a lot more legal immigration that is in this bill. I wish we could do more. So who's going to take care of the baby boomers when we retire? Who's going to replace the workers in our economy if we don't have better legal immigration? What did the CBO say about this bill? If you pass this bill, over the next 20 years, you'll reduce the deficit by $890 billion. Well, how can that be? That means it's good for the economy. How can you reduce the deficit $890 billion if you don't create economic activity? To the American worker, the biggest threat to you is illegal immigration. Tell me how it's better for America to continue amnesty, which is doing nothing, paying people under the table with no regulation. How does that help the American worker to compete against some person who's being paid under the table? This bill stops that. It brings people out of the shadows on our terms, not theirs. You get to stay here if we decide you can stay. We're regaining our sovereignty that's been lost. How do you get 11 million illegal immigrants in this country? Your system is broken from top to bottom. Every nation, including America, has the right to control its borders and control who gets a job, and this bill does that, and I'm glad to have my name on it. And doing nothing is the worst thing for the American worker. So we're going to stop paying people under the table. We're going to give you access to labor you have today if you can't find it. Have you ever been to a meat packing plant? Well, you go and find out who's working in that plant. Mostly Hispanics, people from other parts of the world, not because native-born Americans are lazy. We have higher hopes. There are parts of our economy, like it or not, are dependent upon immigrant labor. And our population is declining, and our needs for legal immigration is growing. This bill does that. As it affects the economy, it will increase our GDP by 3.5% over time because it is good for America to have legal immigration. As to the 11 million, you will be brought out of the shadows, and you will stay on our terms. If you committed a felony or multiple misdemeanors, you're not eligible. But here's what we're going to allow. Go through a criminal background check, pay a fine, get right with the law, and you'll have a legal status. Here's what you'll get to do. You'll get to pay taxes like the rest of us and get to know the IRS. Welcome to America. We're going to create order out of chaos. We're going to get people working and paying in rather than taking out under the table. And what we're going to do above all else, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to prove to ourselves that we can work together for the common good. I have never been more proud to be involved in an issue than I have trying to fix illegal immigration, because it's a national security threat, it's an economic threat, it's a cultural threat. As to my politics, I'm doing great among Hispanics in South Carolina. The bad news, there are not very many who vote in Republican primary. The good news for me is I think I have tried to work with my colleagues, the Gang of Eight, our staff, to start a process that will pay great dividends. To Senator Grassley and Leahy, thank you. To the Democratic and Republican members, thank you so much. I have never been more proud to be in the Senate than I am today. To my critics, I respect your criticism. Thank you for a healthy debate. To the American people, we're beginning, slowly but surely, in your Senate, the greatest deliberative body in history, come together to do important things. And to the 11 million, you will have a second chance. Take advantage of it. Embrace the fact that you're being given a second chance. To the American people, our best days lie ahead, and what makes us special, and I will close with this, is that being French means you're French. Being German means you're German. Being an American means nothing about where you come from, your race, your religion, or your background, your ethnic origin. Being an American is an idea that so many people embrace. Ladies and gentlemen, being an American is something everybody wants to be part of, apparently. Unfortunately, we can't allow everybody in a chaotic position, situation. So I want to thank Senator Durbin, who's protected the American worker, but I want to tell my colleagues in the Senate, that this is a day I've been hoping and waiting for. Thank you all so very much.
Madam President.
Illinois.